But my point being, that doesn't forecast from these companies a scenario in which they would necessarily be hiring. I mean, have you been able to calculate what the immigration crackdown has done to employment?
Well, yeah, there are a couple of things that we could look at. First of all, the private sector employment is up by about 500,000 this year, and government workers, government employment is down by about 100,000. There's another thing is that most of the jobs that have been created in the U.S. are for native-born workers, and there's actually been a reduction in labor supply for non-native-born workers.
How do you prove that?
Excuse me?
How do you prove that?
Oh, we have a survey where they actually ask it. Now, maybe we don't trust the surveys, right?
Right.
And there is actually a
and
thing.
if you know the corporations are hiring undocumented or have a pattern of it, are you prosecuting those companies?
There's technicalities that when someone's released into the country, then in the previous administration, then they would often get a number that would allow them to work legally until they went to court. And so there were for sure people that were undocumented who were being able to work. But the other thing that you can see in the data, because we get the unemployment insurance claims by like county, that about 80% of the claims for unemployment over the last few months have come from blue states. And so there are places like Portland and Chicago where people are fleeing the cities, and you're seeing that in the numbers too.
But you don't plan to prosecute companies who had this pattern you're talking about of hiring people in the country
I don't work
illegally.
for the Justice Department, but I do see the pattern of native-born versus not native-born employment.
Well, we are also seeing in that data, you say you don't trust necessarily that it's manufacturing, that it's trade-related, that is where the lack of hiring is happening. Those are the areas that the president had promised there would be new jobs. When do those new jobs in those sectors come?
Right. Let's think about it again, though, that in terms of the way that the data are a little frustrating for everyone right now, that industrial production's at an all-time high, GDP is booming, productivity was up 3.8% in the last quarter, and it looks like manufacturing jobs are down. And so how is it that industrial production is at an all-time high while manufacturing employment is down? It's something that we're looking forward to seeing what happens in the revisions. The revisions have been, last year, there's a benchmark revision next week. Last year, the revision was more than 1 million over the last year. This is why we need new and better data.
Well, we'll wait to see if those jobs are created. I want to ask you about the Fed, because the president, you were standing next to him in the Oval Office, said he might basically make you one of the most powerful men in the world because he's considering you to become the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. Our CBS polling we just did shows that 70% of Americans want the Federal Reserve to make decisions independently from President Trump, but there's a big partisan difference here. 59% of Republicans say the Fed should be guided by what Trump wants. 41% should be independent of Trump. Which Republican camp do you fall into?
Oh, if I were in that survey, then I would say 100% that monetary policy, Federal Reserve monetary policy, needs to be fully independent of political influence.
Including from President Trump.
Including from President Trump. The fact is that we've looked at countries that have allowed the leaders to take over the central banks. And what tends to happen is that it's a recipe for inflation and misery for consumers. And so central bank independence is something that, as you saw, there was a hearing this week about that Democrats and Republicans in the White House all agreed about. Now, the question is, has the current central bank been as independent as we would like, as transparent as we would like? And I think that there's some dispute about that, which we could go into if you'd like.
Well, Secretary Bessent went into that in an article in the Wall Street Journal this past week. He talked about the central bank's independence being under threat due to mission creep. There should be an independent, nonpartisan review of the entire Fed, its role in regulation, monetary policy, and research. What's your plan to overhaul the Fed?
Well, I don't have a plan to overhaul the Fed right now. I'm just happy to do my job.
You have to have been thinking about it.
Look, I've been the president's one of his top economic advisors for 9 years. We talk about everything from golf to decorating the Oval Office to monetary policy. But right now, what I'm focused on is doing my job as director of National Economic Council every day.
But you would endorse what Secretary Bessent wrote in that article
I agree
fully?
with his article, yes.
And you would be prepared to implement that vision for the Federal Reserve if you are chairman?
It's a hypothetical that we'll see.
Well, it certainly seems from one of the political appointees, the cabinet member, to be a vision for the future of the Fed that the Trump administration would like.
I agree with his vision, but I look forward to the president deciding who's going to be the Federal Reserve chair, and I think that he and Secretary Bessent will do that ably. There are a lot of great candidates.